essentially BGT just ended. How are you feeling about it? How are you feeling about Indian cricket in general right now? Where are we
Not
at?
just like my writing schedule, I'm not feeling good about it. Uh, it's been it's been it's been a sad past few weeks, and also because as a Virat fan, it has not been nice to see. It's not been a good. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
This is just a lot of emotions coming in. Yeah.
We were sneakily gonna try and ask you to name your favorite player in the Indian team at some point, but I think you cleared that up for us pretty quickly.
Yeah, for two reasons. One, he plays really well. Second, he's a West Delhi boy. Okay, so okay. Uh,
Same reasons.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I know the place where he has his chole bhature near Tilak Nagar. So, it's like from the hood. So yeah, so there are two reasons.
So the primary reason that we wanted to speak to you is we want to speak to you particularly about India and Pakistan as a cricket rivalry, as a
Yeah.
storied rivalry. So just to start off, we want to know what are some of your, memories of watching India and Pakistan matches, of experiencing India-Pakistan matches.
I think growing up, right, and I grew up because I'm ancient. I grew up in the early 90s, mid 90s, and all of that, right? And I mean, I'm going to sound like an old person, but you kids really missed out on the peak of the rivalry, okay? Because this was the time, okay, when sort of Sachin Tendulkar had just become the big star, right? Like he was like the person who could make miracles happen, right? So you had this almost godlike belief in him. And on the other hand, you had the Pakistani bowling attack, right? Which was ferocious. Okay, so you had, the Indian sort of side coming up, but the Wasim Akrams, the Waqar Yunis, the Saqlain Mushtaqs of the world, all of them, right? So it was a really evenly matched rivalry, and what I remember very vividly, which was really depressing to see from an Indian's point of view, was Saeed Anwar's 194, right? So that record sort of stood for a long time, right, as the highest score in ODI, right? So that used to be that was uh, that was not a good day seeing that innings. Then I remember, the World Cup of 2003 and Sachin and Shoaib's standoff and Sachin making 90 or 94, I think, odd runs, and just a very explosive innings. And this was in the middle of my 10th standard board exams. Okay. So it was tense. It was tense. Okay. The other thing I remember from the mid 90s as far as India Pakistan matches were concerned, because that time there used to be also the Sharjah thing, right? And the crowds at Sharjah, because Sharjah was where the diaspora would be. The crowds were quite wild, right? Like these were those untamed times of international cricket. Um, I also know for a fact, and from what I've heard from people, communal slurs were used on both sides, So, yeah, so some of the ugliness of the present also goes back to that time, if not everything was perfect. But yeah, also a lot of like just Pakistani team coming over, Indian team going there. Um, if I can also reminisce a little bit more for like a couple of minutes, I still remember, I think it was the 2004 tour of the Indian team to Pakistan. And after a long time, India was playing in Pakistan. And I remember uh, it was also a way for us to sort of get to know the country. I also remember for a fact that there was also this sort of a comparison of both sides, right? So for example, I remember there was a Khushwant Singh column which said that, oh, the women in Pakistan, almost no one was wearing a hijab, but the only hijab wearing people were the Indian Muslims who had gone there to view. So there was also this weird comparisons that used to always occur. It was this moment to sort of really do that, right? And then also the sort of the graciousness and the mehman nawazi of Pakistanis was on full display at that point of time. Because I remember when India won a particular match and it went down the wire, right, to the last over or something. I remember the entire stadium got up to sort of clap for the Indian team, like things are that seem magical right now. I mean, in those days, it was a special moment, but we thought, oh, these things happen, sportsmanship and all of that. But yeah.
I also remember like when we spoke to you about this in our like initial conversation about how there was also a sense of familiarity that as Indian viewers um we felt with the Pakistani players. And when we were talking about that, we were just thinking about whether that sentiment has changed now for you,
Mhm.
for everyone in general. Do
Mm.
we still feel that sense of familiarity? Do we feel it and we consciously choose to not feel it? Um, do you have any thoughts about that?
So, I mean, definitely. I mean, one of the first things was that my father used to say in Punjabi, ke "Ta sade munde ne," these are our boys, right? Because some of these players would be from Punjab, so there would be this information, "Kes Falana is from this district, so and so is from that district." So you would always have this, "Oh yeah, yeah, he's from this one," right? And there was also this sort of um, this idea, for example, Wasim Akram's family is from East Punjab, right? So I remember on one of his tours to India, he actually went with his father to their ancestral village, got some sort of soil to get it back to Pakistan or something, right? Which was a very sweet moment. Similarly, we got to know that Inzamam ul Haq's family is from Haryana, apparently. Like, what? Things that one would not. So, yeah, so there was always this idea of a shared sort of relationship, and it would also come out in acrimonious ways, but still there was a certain charm about it, right? Because you would also always hear कि अच्छा किसने किसको पंजाबी में क्या गाली दी or something like that, right? uh, or someone would be taunting the other person, and so there was this idea. It was Things were competitive, but things were not hostile, if you get the difference. And I feel some of it still continues if you look at the interaction between Virat Kohli and Babar. Or I remember शाहीन अफरीदी नहीं नहीं ये शहनशाह अफरीदी है ना इसका नाम जो लंबा हाँ
Yeah,
so शहनशाह अफरीदी I think he gifted one of the Indian players who just had a child something
I
or
think it might have been
uh,
Bumrah, I think maybe.
Bumrah ko, हाँ Bumrah ko दिए थे. But now what has happened, I don't know. I mean, see, the thing is, for people from my generation, I can't believe I'm using these words. This that old sentiment, I feel for me at least it still stays. But again, I think again for me, my personal history would be implicated in this, right? As someone from that region and all of that, right? Partition and all of that sort of plays into the head. I do know that when I've especially because when I was 10, I moved to Maharashtra, and over there, the sort of um, discourse about the Pakistani team was markedly different, right? There was still more, um, what you would say, the hostility element was there more. Coming into it now, I feel like now because of the way politics has turned, and now with 26/11 was a definite moment. It also was a traumatic moment for a lot of Indians, but also I guess the post I guess 2014, the way politics have changed. um, I think it may have changed, right? Because there are now generations which have never seen India play in Pakistan, or well, Pakistan played in India, but it was under not an India-Pakistan sort of a format. It was more under the World Cup format, right? So there is definitely that, right? So I think in that sense, there may have been a shift. Also, I do feel, at least for me personally, um, this sort of oversaturation of cricket has also brought in a certain level of emotional fatigue around it. Like, I just, barring a few moments now, I don't feel that emotional about it, right? I don't feel, I get fatigued by it. It's sometimes it's too much, right? It's like I don't know what's happening. Like we just said, right? World Cup, kaun sa World Cup? you know, because there is one so often now. So there is that also. Yeah.
Yeah, I do also think that like even within the like it's like the larger this thing of World Cups, like every time there is an India-Pakistan match in those World Cups, like
Yeah.
the significance of it is impressed upon us so much that almost like someone tells you something is important enough times and it starts to like lose its importance also in some kind of way. I feel like
Yeah.
every time the emphasis is always placed on this is the greatest rivalry in cricket and it's the most important match ever, and then it happened last week and the week before that and the week before that. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also been a little bit of a commercial cheapening of it,
mm,
right? Like, the Mocha ads and all of that, like,
yeah.
theek hai, but I think there has been a tendency to sort of overdo it, the whole बाप वो क्या था कि बेटा बेटा होता है और बाप बाप होता है and all of that. Like, there is a lot of unnecessary triumphalism, right? And I feel my very unproved anecdotal hypothesis is that the triumphalism sort of is a mask for the emotional vacuousness, which is at the heart of it, that actually there is no feeling now, right? That it is just this propped up sort of through these injections of commercials and the news channels and everything, right? It is not an organic rivalry anymore. Like, just the fact that also the two teams are, so disproportionate in terms of like where they stand right now.
Mhm.
So then you have to sort of build up a rivalry where it maybe doesn't exist in the same way.
So another thing which we spoke about when we, initially were discussing this is that you went abroad to study, and over there you met people from Pakistan, watched matches with people from Pakistan. So one thing we were
Yeah.
kind of curious about your experience of is how the people that you have met from Pakistan at least perceive Indian cricket, and essentially how the outside world, to your experience, perceives Indian cricket within the like larger state of things.
Right. So I went to so as when was it? 2010 to 11, right? Yeah. So, and I went there as a very arrogant Indian kid. And I mean, of course, I had all the love for my Pakistani friends and all of that, but there was also this idea of, oh, we are better than you. You know, it's also because at that time, I think there was much optimism in the air as far as India was concerned, and we're like, oh, we are secular, liberal, and ye wo tumhare paas kya hai, kind of a moment. It was not explicitly stated, but the undertones were there. Now looking back, I think I was the douche about many things. Uh, so um, I think at that time, especially because under this was Dhoni's era, right? So again, Indian team was like getting its groove at that point, and the World Cup had happened when I was there. So yeah, so there was definitely a lot of, and this was the time when the Indian dominance had started, like even in terms of the statistical dominance over Pakistan and all of that. So I think there was a lot of enthusiasm, I would say, from my side. I may have made some cringe Facebook posts that I would like to disown now. Uh,
As a good media publication, we will go and look for those Facebook posts and link them
No,
somewhere.
I'm going to make my profile so locked in and private right now. That yeah, but yeah, there was. I remember in the SOAS Junior Common Room, they held the joint screening of the match, right? The Indians on one side and the Pakistanis on one side. So there was a lot of that, which was I think which was fun. The other thing I think in terms of the actual perceptions, right? There was you'd often talk to Pakistanis and they would say, and the common stereotypes would also play out, they'd be like, yeah, तुम Indians bowling इसलिए नहीं कर पाते, तुम लोग ना बड़े का गोश्त नहीं खाते, like beef नहीं खाते, तो इसलिए तुम्हारे पास ना इतनी ताकत नहीं होती, or something like that. From the Indian side, uh, we would think the reverse stereotype, right? Even you would hear relatives, would say कि अरे पाकिस्तानी तो बड़े aggressive होते हैं, and the communal stereotypes would come out. अच्छा, एक तो गोश्त भी खाते हैं, aggressive भी होते हैं, all of those things, the sort of the part and parcel of the uh, sort of the political hypotheses that are there in every Indian family or something like that, right? So there would be that, right? But for me, the most interesting thing was when we were watching an India-Pakistan match and um, Yusuf Pathan was playing, right? And Yusuf Pathan, he's like a big guy, right? Like well built and all of that, right? He was a big hitter, right? And so I remember this Pakistani friend of mine. She said, "Oh, मेरी अम्मी तो कहती है कि ये यूसुफ पठान ना कसाई की तरह लगता है." Right?
Mhm.
Now, if you get again the Indo-Islamic society and what that means, first of all, there's an element of caste in that comment, right? कि ये तो कसाई की तरह लगता है. The second thing is the idea of physical strength with belonging to either a lower or a marginal social category and like a working class person basically, because also the idea of skin tone, all of that sort of blends in, which also tells you that no matter, decades have passed since the partition, but there are some things which hold us together, namely our prejudices, right? More than the positive things, we are still sort of I don't want to use a French word, but we are still screwed up in the same way. Oh, the other thing was, I think there was a lot of genuine respect, I think, on both sides for good players, right? Like I had Pakistani friends who would tell me, यार हमारा धोनी जैसा कैप्टन होता ना तो मतलब मजा ही आ जाता, or something like that, right? And yeah, and that time, Pakistan still had some great, amazing bowlers. So you would say, यार हमें तुम्हारे वाले bowlers मिला दो. And of course, in every high school in India that time there was a this पॉलिटिकल अगेन हाइपोथेसिस, राइट, कि अगर इंडिया पाकिस्तान अलग ना होते ना तो जो जॉइंट टीम बनती ना पूरी दुनिया को हरा देती, बिकॉज हमारे बैट्समैन होते, उनके बॉलर होते. सो दिस वाज सॉर्ट ऑफ द एंटीडोट टू द पार्टीशन, राइट. भाई हमारी अगर एक टीम होती ना मतलब हर एक को हरा देती, सो दिस वाज द थिंग कि फिर तो हम वर्ल्ड कप पक्का ही ले आते. सो दिस वाज अनदर रीजन व्हाई द पार्टीशन वाज रिग्रेटेड, एट लीस्ट amongst high schoolers in India, just for that, right? So yeah.
One other anecdote to partition is also Shaheen Afridi's face, because every time he plays, some Indian on Twitter will like float his picture and be like, "We should have been one country."
It's really interesting because I think that this person is Naseem Shah. But I mean, if they have two, then like all the better.
Yeah, but there's an older precedence because the first one was also an Afridi, was Shahid Afridi, right? Who was like the heartthrob, um, and for good reason. And yeah, and so sort of that tradition continues, right? Yeah, so that's the other thing, right? I mean, that's why sports are so interesting because no matter how much the hostility is there, there's always this transgression because you cannot control what you might perceive about the other side, begrudging respect, begrudging attraction, who knows. So yeah,
Mhm.
so there are all ways in which that nation state thing becomes very fluid. Yeah.
One thing that I never actively, consciously realized is that we don't have bilateral like tournaments with Pakistan. Like to me, obviously that's a fact, and I knew that, but it's never something that stood out to me because again, like we're facing each other in World Cups all the time, and um, trying to consciously, actively make that happen, and as you said, just sort of induce that rivalry even if it doesn't exist. So, in just sort of that's thinking about that, where we want that rivalry because commercially it gives us a lot for a certain form of narrative, it gives us a lot, yet we don't have it outside of these spaces. Um,
Mhm.
what we were sort of thinking about was what does that do for a cricket fan? What does that do for someone who maybe cared about the rivalry at a certain point of time in their life, but doesn't really care about it that much now? Um, just why do we like why does it matter in this way that we are not going to play Pakistan, we're not going to go to Pakistan, but we, as much as we want that, we also do want these matches to happen in some way or the other.
So I think this is where I just uh, alluded to the transgressive aspect, right? Now, yeah, you want to play, you still have to have India-Pakistan matches because money, right? So they are not going to go away, right? But what not playing in Pakistan, for example, does is that you look at the players in isolation, right? You do not look at that country as a whole, right? So what you're trying to control is that transgression, right? Because, for example, when India went to Pakistan in 2004, the entire stadium got up and cheered for India, right? That problematizes that very strict binary in your head, right? Because the best way to other someone is to have the least amount of information about it, right? To have them as these very abstract things कि ठीक है उनकी 2 फुट लंबी दाढ़ी होती है or whatever however Bollywood imagines them these days ऐसे it it sort of is a way to control that, right? It's control how you want to interact with Pakistan, for example, right? So yeah, so in a way, because the commercial logic doesn't allow you to fully sort of break that link, so you want to manage how you want to perceive that link, right? Also, you want to, in a way, make it, and this is where your thesis is going to come up next. It also is a way to um, sort of have this status, right? Now we are the big boys, and anyways, you are our rival in a geopolitical sense, so we'll show you your place, right? Because without cooperating with us, it's anyways, you cannot get very far in cricket, right? So it's also that, right? So there are all these other factors that I'm pretty sure that we'll have to interview you about soon. So
Yeah, so coming to, I mean, what is probably the elephant in the room, the most relevant point right now is the recent announcement that the Champions Trophy in 2025, I'll say in 2025, the Champions Trophy this year, no, that's not
yeah,
normal. That's not okay.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
which was initially supposed to be in Pakistan is now shifting to a hybrid model where all of India's
yeah,
matches will be in Dubai. If India
yeah.
reaches a semi-final or a final, then it will also be in Dubai. Uh, it's a strange one in that the entire world has known for years that the Champions Trophy is going to be in Pakistan in this year,
Mhm.
and then suddenly in about October, India
Yeah.
magically woke up to the fact that they would have to travel to Pakistan in order to play in the Champions Trophy, and they decided that that was not going to be something that was going to work out, and so a solution had to be found. So we want to first ask you about uh, power dynamics in the situation, right? Because this is the historical precedent in cricket, at least, is that if you can't travel to a place, as happened in the 2003 World Cup, I think, for example, there were certain countries who didn't want to travel to Zimbabwe, and so they forfeited their matches which were scheduled to be in Zimbabwe
Yeah.
and didn't travel to them instead. Um, this is not what's happened here, and instead, a workaround solution has been found instead. So the first thing to ask, I guess, is kind of what this tells us about the power dynamics between India and the ICC at large, between India and Pakistan in a cricketing sense, and more specifically, um, what in that dynamic is this how the situation would have played out at any point in the last 10 years, 20 years, is this how the dynamic has always been, or is it a development that we're coming to now?
I think India's financial dominance in cricket is now unquestionable, right? Okay. Now, for me, the question is then how do you use it, right? And I am, again, now this is, I'm going to put on my IR hat. This is not my cricketing hat. My IR hat is that if you have dominance, yeah, you can use coercive power, but you have to make that dominance long lasting or make it good or something, you have to have consent, right? You have to get people to believe that your hegemony is good for them, right? And it's good for the game in general, right? um because that also makes you seem benevolent and gracious, and people are invested in your project, right? Well, now you have this power, right? And you have to use the instruments of power in the best way possible, right? For me, right now, the way we are using this power is crude, right? It is not, first of all, it will breed resentment against India. And I'm not just talking about Pakistan, I'm talking about many other countries, right? Second, it might have the longer term implication of people losing interest in cricket as a whole, right? Because if it becomes boring beyond a point, yes, you can use your commercial um, drum beating to sort of kick things up but there's only so far you can carry on, right, with that. And sooner or later, if there are other sports which offer a more exciting sort of a thing, right, where things are interesting, cricket may not hold that space anymore, right? So, uh, how I will compare it, in my head, I will compare it to what's happening with Bollywood, right? So, what's for me, what's happening in Bollywood is now like we saw the corporatization of Bollywood, which was initially a very good move because it sort of broke them from the shackles of the underworld financing and all of that, right? And gave them a sustainable model, right? But then what happened with the over commercialization is that everything became about 100 crore, 200 crore, 300 crore, 400 crore, and all of that nonsense, right? And thus you had a whole industry which is now sort of trying to build hype upon hype upon hype. What it was ignoring was that people, you need good scripts, you need good stories, and you need actors who can speak the language in which they're doing the film well, right? And that's the other thing, right? What I, at least personally, I have felt is that my even emotional investment in films has gone. And I'm not talking about that, oh, we don't make art house and we are not making Satyajit Rays anymore and we're not doing this. I'm saying we are not even making good commercial cinema, right? I'm talking about just good, nonsensical Hindi cinema, right? And one which has heart and soul at its core. And I feel the same sort of, sorry, coming back from my rant about Bollywood, I feel the same is happening to cricket, right? I find the heart component sinking. The only thing I have now heart for, I mean, Kohli bit movie Bichara has all his crisis and all of that, but the other one is Bumrah, right? Bumrah is like my last woe. That's the thing. Um, I watch most on my Reddit, right? This Bumrah's just bowling, like that's how I waste my time.
So how are how are these power dynamics, how are these changes in the way this rivalry functions, and how changes in the way Indian cricket is functioning, how changes in the way international cricket is functioning, how that's affecting the people who watch it, how that's affecting the people who have cared about the sport for a really long time.
Yeah, so my fear is uh, that cricket might devolve from being the national passion into the national pastime. Okay, so what I mean by pastime is कि आप घर साफ कर रहे हो और वो बस पीछे बैकग्राउंड में it is just running, right? It's how I put an episode of Friends or Modern Family while I'm going about my day, right? I mean, and they are great shows, by the way. Okay, no diss intended to either of them. But ठीक है, अब मैंने 10 बार देख लिया है, so I know how the episode is going to turn out, right? Anyway, but I was never passionate about Modern Family, right? So there's no sense of loss over there, right? But with cricket, it might just turn out to be अच्छा हाँ चल रहा है मैच ठीक है अरे छक्का मार दिया, and that's the other thing, right? In making it follow the commercial logic, the overall T20fication of it, the imbalance between the batting and the bowling, वो um, it's like ठीक है, I mean the six now doesn't excite me anymore, right? तो क्या करोगे? अट्ठा लेके आओगे आप, दस्सा लेके आओगे, क्या करोगे? मतलब you get it. There is a nice piece by Walter Benjamin. It's called something, a work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction or something like that. मैं भूल गया उसका exact नाम, इधर पढ़ी हुई है किताब, but yeah, one of those. It's a great article, and for me, I think that's the thing, that um, the mechanical reproduction of cricket is what I fear the most, right? The soul sort of goes out of it.
So next week, I know I want to engage you in a deeply counterfactual piece of history when I ask you a question of, do you think that this kind of situation would have arisen in, let's say, the 2000s when Ganguly's teams were going to Pakistan? But largely, what I want to ask is, how much do you think cricketing relations between India and Pakistan, but countries in general also, are a function of the relationships between those countries in a larger sense than just sport?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and now more so than ever, I think they are sort of become more of a linear function of what's happening with the states themselves. Also because the kind of stakes, right? You hardly will find people who will want to oppose status quo, right? Who would want to question the powers that be. And this is happening all over. This is not just an India specific thing, right? And that's what makes that transgressive possibility of sport, mm, like that's what dims that possibility, right? Because you don't have that environment, so you sort of take the state's lead in a certain sense, right? You don't have these eccentrics, the mavericks, the people going rogue or something, right? But you always had एक और दो वैसे what you would colloquially call the sarpiras, right? Would make things very interesting. I feel अब वो सरफिरों की गुंजाइश नहीं बाकी है, and that's what makes it less interesting, right? Yeah, they just it's like a X goes to Y, so your causal arrow and your research design becomes very easy, but that doesn't make for good cricket. Yeah, so good news for Ananya, bad news for the rest of us. Yeah.
I think that's been like a larger cricketing theme for the last year. Like good news for me, bad news for cricket.
If someone is not happy with the way cricket is going, Madan is fully to blame. There's nobody else. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I can get on board with that. Yeah.
To a
Um,
more existential question on this, do you think a solution is possible? Do you think cricket can be fixed? Do you think the India Pakistan, how we think about it now, where we're at, is there any way that you think things can change or be better?
oh, of course, of course. I mean, as much as I was despondent, things change. And there's a nice verse by Firak that I tend to overuse quite a bit. But it's देख रफ्तार इनकलाब फिराक कितनी आहिस्ता और कितनी तेज, मतलब look at the speed of revolution Firak, how slow and how fast at the same time, right? So I think because we tend to sometimes get too absorbed in the present political moment, right? And we think this is how, like, and we draw linear projection to the future, right? But I think that's what makes politics and international politics and all of these things interesting, right? You never know which way things will turn, right? And the people um, who are the absolute kings and kingmakers will cease to be irrelevant in a few years, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, right? Which is, by the way, sorry, another Habib Jalib quote, Habib Jalib verse, which, again, apropos nothing and not making it about any political figure in general, but he says, तुझसे पहले जो शख्स यहाँ तख्त नशी था उसको भी अपने खुदा होने पे उतना ही यकीन था, right? So the person who was occupying the throne before you, he also thought of himself as God, right? So yeah, so things change, power dynamics change. Sometimes the change is internal, sometimes the change is externally imposed, right? So I'm hopeful.
that's a really lovely answer, actually, I must say. As someone who engages academically a lot with Pakistan, we want to
Mm.
know, how does your academic engagement change the way, your academic interest, your field of research, change the way that you engage with not just sport in this, as we've been discussing so far, but with the variety of Pakistani, media and things that you come across, films, music, whatever. How
Mm.
does the way you consume those things change with as a result of your academic interest? Does it change?
For a long part of my this academic journey, I've pretended that my interests in the things that I do are completely objective and have nothing to do with anything, right? कि हाँ, it just happened कि, I got interested in this country or अरे हाँ चलो इसके बारे में पढ़ लेते हैं. But an honest answer that I realized, and my friends used to tease me about this. So एक ने कहा कि भाई तुम्हें तो भाई पाकिस्तान फेटिश है, तो तुम you will study everything and anything about that. I think something to do with, I guess, my own family history. I think something to do with path dependency of things that I read, and somewhere that I think that has shaped my academic interests. Did I? I think I might have said shaped my Pakistani interest, but shaped my academic interest, and it goes back into it, right? So after the academic interests, now shape the way I look at these countries, because maybe earlier my interest was there, but the way I looked at these countries was from a very conventional perspective, right? Then you study more, you read more, you complicate things in your head more, right? So all your whites and blacks becomes grays, and not only about the fact that it's about things like hostility, but also about things like friendship and what you associate positive. The whole India Pakistan Aman ki Asha. You will begin to look at that critically because you sort of even see the cracks in that narrative, right? You see where that narrative is also problematic in its own way, right? Or even, yeah. So you sort of it makes you question a lot of these assumptions. So yeah, so there's a sort of a feedback loop going in both directions, I guess. Yeah.
You've basically sort of answered our last question, because the last thing that we had was what you, in a way, mentioned earlier as well, of like sort of, um, like how knowing a thing more familiarizes you with it to not know it, but like all of that, um, and to then think about how we engage with Pakistan outside of the whole political cricketing aspect. And if we were to engage with Pakistani history, Pakistani culture as independent of India, like in and of
Mm.
itself, um, which is where I thought that if all of us did your Pakistan course, would we start thinking about, like, would we start watching an India-Pakistan match differently? Would we start thinking about that rivalry differently?
I'll just say the short answer to that is I hope so. नहीं तो I've been a really bad teacher if I either I turn into if I turn you guys into some kind of an uncritical person, uncritical whether on the hawkish side or uncritical on the Aman Kyasha side, right? So yeah, I think then I would have failed as a teacher, right?
Perfect. I have one last question actually. Just it struck me now that I feel I should ask. I'll regret if I don't. So, do you have recommendations for Pakistani media that one should be consuming?
हाँ हाँ shows में चुड़ैल्स okay absolutely brilliant. अच्छा, random suggestions. Okay, YouTube channels. I love Feministani's content, right? FEMINUSTANI. So feminine ustad basically. Feministani Sabahat Zakaria runs the YouTube channel. She's this amazing Pakistani pop culture analyst. I think that's how I would put it. And she does these amazing deep dives into like Pakistani culture and all of that. Then there was a really random YouTube channel from the early 2010s called Naked Tyrants. Okay. I'm not going to say anything, just take it or leave it kind of a thing. Okay. Uh, and there's a rock band that I really enjoyed, Bamboo Sauce, BUMBU, Bamboo Sauce. Great music. And what else? Oh, Pakistani film, the original Maula Jat. That's I would recommend. Yeah, that you guys watched that. I think, yeah, those would be my top records. Also strings. I love strings, like the music band. I think, yeah. Yeah, my Spotify is just that, right? So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor. That's
All
all
right.
our
I
questions.
मुझे कुछ ऐसा कोड किया ना जिससे मेरी नौकरी चली गई. I will
We'll
come
show it.
after you guys.
We'll show it to you before it goes out, and then after that, it's the internet decides, not.